Everybody, and welcome to today's live. I'm Chef AJ, and as you know, I've been going live at least once a day since the sheltering in place started to create a sense of community and connection and introduce you to some really interesting, dynamic people. And today is no exception. He's one of my favorite people in the world, one of my very favorite speakers. He is the co-author of an amazing book called The Pleasure Trap. He's also the co-founder of the TrueNorth Health Center located in Santa Rosa, California. And so many people are very fearful of what's happening in the world today with the COVID-19. And of course, we're not taking that lightly, but one of the things we want to articulate is that we believe that what you eat matters, not just for this pandemic, but in general. So Dr. Goldhamer is going to talk a little bit about diet and how it affects our health, whether or not we get a disease, whether or not we can recover, and if it affects immunity at all. So welcome, Dr. Goldhamer. Thank you so much for taking the time to talk to people today.
My pleasure. Glad to be here.
Right. So what do you think? Does what we eat matter?
Yeah, diet does matter. In fact, it may be one of the larger effects that we can have in determining our health. And it makes sense that it would matter. You know, so much of our relationship with the outside environment comes in response to us consuming food. You know, you breathe air, you drink water, and you eat food. But the diet that we eat, you know, has a major influence, not just on your current symptoms today, but also the effect of your immune system and its ability to deal with problems that are going to come along tomorrow as well.
And what diet do you think is best for that?
Well, you know, the diet that we appear to function the best on, in my opinion, is a whole plant food diet. So a diet that's derived from the foods we're designed to actually eat. So that would be things like fruits and vegetables, minimally processed beans, grains, nuts, seeds, these types of food factors. What it doesn't include are the highly processed fractionated foods and the animal foods. So the meat, fish, fowl, eggs, dairy products, oil, salt, sugar. Basically, the stuff that makes up around 90% or more of the food that most people eat should probably be excluded. And what's left are the whole natural foods, which make up a relatively small percentage of the foods that people actually eat.
Do you think the diet should be plant-based or plant-exclusive? Many people use words like plant-based, plant-strong, plant-predominant. Does it matter to be, do we need to be 100%, or is it okay to have some animal products occasionally?
Depends on what your goal is. You know, if your goal is maximizing health, I think a whole plant food diet, exclusively whole plant food diet, is probably the best diet. And a diet that completely eliminates the chemicals added to food that tend to make people fat, sick, and miserable would be ideal. So we would recommend a whole plant food diet that's SOS free. SOS is the international symbol of danger. It also stands for the chemicals that are added to food that fool the satiety mechanisms in the brain and lead to overeating and the epidemic of disease and debility that we see around us. So that includes salt, oil, and sugar.
So why do you believe that these chemicals that you say fool the brain satiety mechanisms, salt, oil, and sugar, why do they make people fat, sick? Maybe take them one at a time.
Sure. Well, these are all natural substances that are a critical part of whole foods. And so our brains are designed to be able to detect those necessary and essential components. The problem is in the modern world, we've learned to fractionate foods and process these components out of food. So, you know, for example, sugar is not a food. It is a natural part of virtually all foods. So you have, you know, glucose and other sugars in a whole food. But when we concentrate it out and turn it into a chemical substance like table sugar, we get some significant untoward effects as a consequence of it. For example, you can eat sugar cane. You can chomp on sugar cane pretty much all you want. But when you take, you know, 30 pounds of it to make a small amount of sugar, now you get a very, very different effect. So the way sugar works is that our brains are designed to detect sugar and enjoy sugar, and that's how we know whole foods are good. But when we get into a refining process, turn it into a highly concentrated chemical byproduct, and then add that to food, we end up with a problem, and one of those problems is obesity. The same thing's true with oil. You know, we need essential fats in our diet, especially omega-3 fatty acids, to form the other components that are necessary. But when we tear foods apart remove one component, in this case the oil, feed it back to people, it tends to not work as well in terms of our ability to regulate our intake, and as a consequence, we end up with problems of obesity. And salt, interestingly enough, doesn't contain any calories per se, but in my opinion is still responsible, significantly contributing to obesity. And the way salt may contribute to obesity is because of its effect on satiety. It can actually stimulate what's called passive overeating. If you eat your fill of something, say like potatoes or rice or whatever, you would eat a certain amount. But if you salt those potatoes or rice up, what you'll find is on average you'll eat more. Now some people say, well, yeah, because it makes it taste better. So of course you'll eat more. But what tasting better is, in part, is more stimulation of dopamine in the brain. And so yes, it makes it taste better, but it's a drug-like effect, in my opinion. And as a consequence, when we minimize or eliminate adding salt to food, we tend to minimize or eliminate the tendency to overeat whole foods. And as a consequence, we reduce obesity and the consequences that go along with it. So it's not intuitively obvious to think that putting a little bit of salt in your food, salt not containing any calories directly, would have any effect on your weight. But in my experience, it does.
So even that little bit of brown sugar on the oatmeal, even that little bit of salt on our vegetables, for some people that might be a deal breaker?
Well, it's very similar to alcohol. You know, if you're an alcoholic, that little extra drink or two may stimulate the cascade of addiction that leads into, you know, finding yourself, you know, unable to talk or move lying under some bridge somewhere. So, you know, for them, a little bit is a big deal. Now, for other people, they might be able to have a drink and not become a drunk. But if you're already a drunk, it's not you. That's not something you should be doing. And the same thing may be true, you know, if you're one of those people that has very sensitive satiety mechanisms and you can have a little bit of this or a little bit of that and not become overweight, you may be able to, quote, get away with it, at least as far as your weight's concerned. But if you're struggling with obesity, you may not be the person that should be eating a little bit of this or a little bit of that. First of all, a little bit often very quickly becomes a lot. But even if you did just make it a little bit, you're still offsetting whole natural foods with their normal satiety feedback mechanisms for highly processed foods that don't have the same feedback, and systematically it's going to ultimately over time result in obesity. So the question you have to ask yourself is, how fat do you want to be? If you just want to be a little bit fat, then a little bit of that stuff you may be able to get away with it. If you don't want to be overweight, if you don't want to have the consequences of immunosuppression, of health compromising that comes from that, then stop it. And, you know, adopt a whole plant food diet. What you'll find eventually is after you're used to eating a whole plant food diet, it's not that much difficult from a discipline standpoint to avoid the other food factors. It's just like a person that's been a recovered alcoholic for a long time doesn't have to put all of their energy every day into choosing not to drink. They may still have to put extra energy into it, but it doesn't take all of their waking moments. When you first are trying to lose weight, it can be all-encompassing, the amount of energy it takes. But eventually you adopt better habits, you neuroadapt to a healthier diet, and now it doesn't take quite as much effort, particularly if you put yourself in an environment that's health-promoting.
Well, you know, I agree with you. I've followed an SOS-free diet since about 2008, and, you know, I finally got my weight and my cravings and food addictions under control, and I've never felt better.
Have you found that it takes less energy per day on average now than it did 8 years ago when you first were tightening up the screws in your diet?
It's very easy now. It's automatic.
Yeah.
Yeah. I mean,
that's what my experience has been as well. The longer you do it, overall, the easier it gets. That doesn't mean, though, that if you're put in an environment of temptation, it doesn't require you to put some extra energy in. And the problem is most of the people we know are living in an environment of temptation. They're living in a world designed to make them fat, sick, and miserable, in a world where everybody wants to give them what they want, not what they need. So they go to work and there's temptation all around them and there's social consequences. They're at home and they've got temptation all around them. They're everywhere they go, everything they do tends to try to reinforce poor behavior choices. So it seems like it takes an inordinate amount of effort, because it does. But one of the things that happens is you can try to continue to improve your environment so there's less of that overwhelming temptation, particularly when you're exhausted, fatigued, irritable, or more vulnerable.
Well, you mentioned temptation, and it's interesting because Robin is asking live, do you, Dr. Goldhamer, ever have cravings?
Yeah, cravings aren't really much of a problem in my experience, and they haven't been for many years. But now keep in mind, I have a few advantages over the average person. Number one, I started this diligently when I was 16 years old. So I'm 61 years old now. So what is that, 45 years? That's a lot of years of doing it. Number two, I work at the TrueNorth Health Center, where we have fabulous chefs and staff, and there's no temptations. So it's whole plant food, SOS free every day. And since I'm at the center and eat, up to 20 meals a week at the center, there's obviously a lot less temptation because, I work there. And at home, I live with Dr. Jennifer Morano, so there's not going to be any temptation at the house. And so the only problem I might have is when I'm traveling. And there, as you said, AJ, once you get used to this, we have our little adaptive strategies. And so honestly, at my point, it really doesn't take any energy or discipline or anything else. It's just kind of what we do. The only potential challenge is securing, access to some calories. Sometimes you go to these health conferences and there's really nothing healthy to eat, because everything is highly processed, fractionated food. It might be vegan, but it's certainly not healthy. And it's even worse when I speak at medical conferences, which more recently I've been given the opportunity to do. They're serving, I know recently I was in Texas for a diabetes conference, physicians specializing in treating diabetes, and they had pulled pork sandwiches and chocolate cake. And so, literally the only food or something that closely resembled food were really the table decorations. It was really remarkable. And of course, most of these physicians are overweight or obese. And it was interesting, after my presentation, I talked about some of the results that we've published in the scientific literature and the success. And many of the doctors came over and were pointing out that one guy said, I've been in practice 25 years treating diabetics, and I've never seen one get well. They know that if a person is overweight and comes in and loses weight, they don't think, oh, this patient must have adopted a whole plant food diet and begun an exercise and adequate sleep program. They assume that this person may have colon cancer, has developed an eating disorder, or is a drug addict. Because sometimes their only experience of people losing weight and keeping it off is when they develop cancer, develop an eating disorder, or become a drug addict. So they're initially going to be worried in ordering tests consistent with what their experience is, because the fact is, under conventional medical care, many of these conditions never get well. It's not part of the paradigm. They don't even think about people losing weight and keeping it off, or normalizing their blood pressure or blood sugar levels. Because given the advice that they're giving people, following conventional medical advice, they're promising you that will never happen. You will never get well. You will be overweight and sick for the rest of your life. Because what they're doing has nothing to do with getting rid of the causes of the reason why you've developed the obesity and developed these diseases of dietary excess. And that's where the doctors at the TrueNorth Health Center try to approach it from a different paradigm. Our model is, can you eliminate the cause of the problem so you can get well, maintain normal weight, blood pressure, blood sugar levels, and eliminate the need for medication? And that's a very radical concept.
But you actually see that happening.
Well, we not only see it happening, now we've done an increasingly effective job of publishing the results in peer-reviewed scientific journals showing that it does happen. It can happen safely and effectively, but you have to be prepared to do, radical things like eat well and exercise and sustain those behavior patterns long enough to be able to get the results. And of course, at TrueNorth Health, we also use medically supervised water-only fasting, where people are going on water fast for as long as 40 days, which definitely is considered radical, but often an effective stepping stone to get people back to the basics of diet, sleep, and exercise. And whether you fast or you don't fast, the key is getting on a health-promoting diet and lifestyle, and you have to sustain it. And it's difficult, and that's just how it is. There's nothing we can say to make it easy. We can tell you that it'll get easier as you get well and you establish your behavior patterns, but it's difficult. That's why most people aren't going to do it, because they'd rather, die as a consequence of their behavior patterns rather than have to, escape the pleasure trap.
But is there any benefit of doing something? Because, many of our colleagues accuse you and then me, because I really do everything you say, that we're making it too hard for people to be vegan, that they're going to go back to animal products because it's ridiculous to tell people they shouldn't have sugar and salt.
Yeah. Well, I think they're right. I think that in many respects, what our colleagues are saying is true. It is much more difficult to not only have to give up your meat, fish, fowl, eggs, and dairy products, but then also have to give up the oil, salt, and sugar. Because at least now, at least vegan isn't considered, a bad thing. I know there's many people, they wouldn't necessarily want to do it, but they wouldn't mind terribly that you did it, and they could see the arguments, the support of the environment, or the potential health benefits, and that's become a little bit more acceptable, and now you see vegan options out there. But SOS is a whole nother issue. Getting rid of salt, oil, and sugar in some ways is even more difficult, because then you would have to actually shop and chop and make your own food, because all the heated, beated, treated, chopped, processed foods, even if they're vegan, they have salt, oil, and sugar. In fact, I'm saying they have more salt, oil, and sugar to try to, quote, make up for the deficit. And so the argument that's made by many people in the health arena is that our goal should be to help as many people as possible, to convert as many people over to healthful living in terms of because of its impact on the environment and all the tremendous benefits, animal rights issues, moral, ethical, spiritual. And so their main concern is, how can we help the most people possible? And that's because many of these people are really good people, and they want to help a lot of people, and they're very nice and kind and caring and all that. Yeah, that's not me. So my interest is not saving the world. Not that I wouldn't mind people do that. I'm grateful that people are out there doing that work. My only interest is really the patient in front of me. What is that one individual's pattern that's going to most likely get them and keep them well? And so my focus is really on that. And that's a much more, narrow focused, self-centered kind of, if you will, selfish motivation. And I have believe that in that particular limited application, the best advice is to give people the diet that's going to maximize their health and longevity. And I believe that's a whole plant food SOS-free diet. But I think the diet that eliminates the addition of salt, oil, and sugar, that's completely free of animal products and highly processed foods, is the one that's most likely to result in health recovery, maintenance, and stabilization. Now, the argument is, well, how much does a little bit make? Like, couldn't they have just a little bit of this and a little bit of that, and that would make it easier to get people to do it? We could have a broader audience. And the answer is yes, that might be true. At the TrueNorth Health Center, though, we tend to see the people that, if they really got thriving health doing that little bit of this and a little bit of that, they wouldn't necessarily be coming to the TrueNorth Health Center. They're coming to us because they've tried everything and they still aren't quite where they want to be, or they're healthy, but they really want to stay that way. They're particularly interested in maximizing long-term outcome. And so they're willing to give up a little bit of this and a little bit of that in exchange for the long-term potential benefit. Now, we're doing actually some research coming up next year that I'm really excited about, because it's looking at biomarkers that predict health in healthy people. In other words, we already know, and we've published a bunch of data showing if you have high blood pressure, diabetes, if you've got lymphoma, cancer, whatever, you can do fasting and a whole plant food SOS-free diet and recover your health. We've shown that. We've demonstrated that. But what about in healthy people? Do they have to still eat this really strict diet and exercise and sleep patterns, or is it really that beneficial to do preventative fasting, et cetera? So the way we're going to try to answer that question is looking at biomarkers that predict health and immunity. So in healthy people, there's differences too. For example, not everybody responds the same to exposure to various organisms. For example, the influenza viruses or the COVID viruses or these other things that we get exposed to. In other words, one may affect how vulnerable you are to getting infected. More importantly, it may affect on how well you recover. You notice not everybody gets these infections dies. Some people die, some people recover, some people have serious consequences. So what is it that makes the difference in a person that recovers well, or maybe isn't even aware they've been exposed, versus somebody that has devastating consequences? Well, that's being studied right now quite actively as far as the current epidemic or pandemic that we're dealing with. But these issues have been ongoing, basically forever. In fact, if you think about it, even this year, I think influenza still killed, I think, more people than COVID may have, or it's close. So the point is, all of these different organisms, infections, including bacterial infections, when people become exposed to them, their immune system is going to determine largely how they respond. In fact, in COVID, I understand that one of the reasons some people get very serious consequences is actually an overreaction of the immune system, or inappropriate reaction, very, very much like you see in autoimmune disease. And so, we know that in autoimmune diseases, things like rheumatoid arthritis and ulcerative colitis and related conditions, things like asthma, eczema, psoriasis, that the immune system is responsible for the symptoms that you're experiencing. It's actually your immune system attacking your own tissues. And there's different theories about why some people manifest those diseases and others don't. They include explanations like genetic predisposition, things like gut leakage, where people may absorb proteins into the body, and genetically vulnerable people may get this overreaction. Well, what do you do about it? Conventional medicine says, well, let's shut down the immune system. Let's take steroids or medications that suppress the immune response. And sometimes those can be very clinically effective. Short term, it's almost like a dream because the symptoms go down, but then it can become a nightmare because it turns out you need your immune system. And when you suppress it with powerful drugs, long term, there can be consequences. Our approach in autoimmune disease is very different. We're trying to eliminate the contributing factors that might contribute to the gut leakage, the free radicals, the reactive molecules, with dietary change and with fasting. And then get people on diets that don't tend to promote that type of response. So it's not been studied yet in terms of COVID-19. In other words, what effect diet has on prevention, getting affected, or what effect it has on recovery. But I wouldn't be surprised to find out that the people that are going to do the best overall are going to be the people that are the healthiest. And so what our research is going to be looking at is identifying those biomarkers that predict resistance and health, and seeing whether or not diet and lifestyle and fasting actually augment that and help that. We know it does in sick people, and what we'd like to do is find out if it works as well as we think it should work in healthy people. So that's kind of where our next area of focus is.
Wonderful. There's so many comments, and if I don't read them, they disappear. So if you wouldn't mind, I'd like to read a few of them. Heidi says, you are a brilliant doctor. You have helped me so much over the years. Thank you. Thanks for all you do and have done for us. And then Robin says, I've read The Pleasure Trap and visited True North after. Great experience, best doctors in the world. And there's more nice comments, so I'll read them as they come along.
Let's hear some of the critical comments, though, the people that disagree. Okay. That's where the interesting stuff gets in, with the people that feel like I'm full of hot air.
There is one. I was actually typing back to the person who made it, say, make sure she was talking about you. I don't talk about me or both of us. She goes, you are encouraging disordered eating.
Okay, I'd like to hear more about that. If the definition of disordered eating is eating a whole plant food SOS-free diet, then I completely agree, because we're definitely encouraging eating something that's very different than the norm. It's a radical diet. Radical, I believe, comes from the word radicus, which means root or cause. We're trying to get rid of the reasons why people get into these issues to begin with, and that is, fooling the mechanisms that normally regulate proper feeding behavior. It's interesting with animals. If you give animals ad libitum exposure to food and it's whole natural foods, they get to a certain weight and stabilize. But if you put these same chemicals in the animal chow, the salt, oil, and sugar, they will systematically overeat and develop obesity. And so you can turn that on and off. Not that you'd want to do that, but using rodents and other animals, they've done these studies where they give the animal free choice. Can eat what it wants, and it will, just like we do, choose to eat the more highly concentrated foods, because that's how we're set up. We're not set up for an environment where these types of temptations would normally be present. And by the way, the animals will also become alcoholics, and they'll also become drug addicts. So it's not like we're exempt from, the laws of physics or thermodynamics or of nature.
Thank you. So I just want to one more time talk about whether or not we're, like this person believes, we're creating eating disorders because our suggestions are so restrictive. I recently appeared on the local news I did a cooking demo, and they had told me that it was to promote, the vegan diet, and, I cook and eat your way SOS free. And they told me the host was just diagnosed with type 2 diabetes and not to use any sugar. And I said, well, that's not going to be a problem because I don't use sugar. I only use fruit. So the host was very excited because then he could taste what I was making. And so there were a lot of people on Facebook, ethical vegans, that were just bashing me because by saying, and I wasn't telling everybody else to not eat sugar. I was just saying in this recipe, and it's great, it doesn't have sugar, like how what a terrible vegan I am because by not eating sugar, I'm making it harder for people to be
Yes.
vegan. Wait, can I just say one more thing? The reason I'm asking this is because I think it's important that I'm not really telling other people what to do. I'm just saying what I did and what worked for me. But do you really believe that by recommending no sugar and no salt, it's making it harder? Because the people that I know that have left veganism, they haven't left it because they couldn't put brown sugar on their oatmeal or salt on their broccoli. They left it to go back to eating animal products.
Right. So in answer to your question, I do think it's more difficult for people initially to get in their head the idea that now they're not only giving up animal foods, but they're giving up all their processed addictive foods as well. Let's go back to using alcohol as an example. If you tell alcoholics, look, you cannot drink at all. No alcohol, nothing, you get nothing. Do you think most alcoholics are like all excited about that? What if you told alcoholics, okay, just drink beer and wine, okay, and you'll be fine? Wouldn't that be an easier message to tell people? The problem is we know it doesn't work because when people keep drinking, it still ends up cascading into a problem. So yes, if we could tell people, well, look, just have a little of this and a little of that. Don't be too hard on yourself. Accept yourself the way you are, and everything will be fine. That would be great. And if it worked, I'd be all for it. Honestly, it would be so much easier not to have to be, giving people this rigid advice. The problem in my experience now, doing this 36 years with people, is it doesn't work for many people, or at least the people that I see. And so what does work, when I look back, like who was successful, who lost weight, kept it off, who, 10 years, 20 years. In fact, I just got a guy, AJ, who's coming in 36-year follow-up. So I saw him 36 years ago, and he was 34 years old, and he just turned 70. And he told me the same story I keep hearing over and over again from these patients is, yeah, all my buddies are falling apart, and they're all, having trouble. And here I am 36 years later coming in for health, promoting, short preventative fast and doing great. And so now I'm seeing, decades of this. I don't see people coming back in saying, oh, I adopted that SOS-free diet and then I developed an eating disorder and disordered behavior and now I'm having trouble. That's not what the experience has been. In fact, quite the opposite. But we do see a lot of people that struggle, with making these transitions. But once people make those transitions, I think most of them would say things similar to what you said. It's actually easier now than it was then. And as far as we don't know, because the data's, we haven't really done good data looking at adherence and what translates to the best results. The fact is, if you look at most adherence data, none of the stuff works very well. A significant percentage of backsliding occurs, including, by the way, in vegan diet compliance. So what's interesting is that, and as you said, it's not because they aren't eating sugar and salt. Goodness knows, most vegans are on diets that are higher in sugar and salt even than some of their meat-eating counterparts. But you still have about the same percentage of the population that are actually doing a vegan diet now, that, as far as I've been able to tell, as you have in past years or decades. And so a lot of people will, start doing a vegan diet, but oftentimes will backslide into their animal-based foods. And the same thing's true, of course, with salt, oil, and sugar. Maybe they'll start trying to make changes, but they have difficulty with compliance. And so, as I mentioned, next year's focus study is on this issue of adherence and biomarker changes that occur in healthy people. So we do want to answer this question: is what is the best strategy? And we're likely to find it'll depend on the person. Some people are better with a more strict approach. Other people may be more successful with a more flexible approach. And Dr. Lyle talks about this a lot, about he emphasizing the importance of the ego trap and versus the pleasure trap. So you have two factors that can be in competition with each other. The pleasure trap is pretty simple. If you have a little, you're going to want a lot. We argue stop it. And, certainly with alcoholism, it's been shown that the most effective strategy for managing alcoholism is to just not drink. And I argue that that may be true for people with weight loss issues too. It may be easier to just stop it than it is to tease yourself and constantly have to deal with these issues. But the other side is the ego trap, the idea that, if you try to deny people everything, they may have a rebounding effect and go for everything. And this argument is that even if it's not the ideal diet, it's better, it's an improvement, and it'll result in better adherence. But I don't know that that's been proven yet, that allowing people a little of this and a little of that in the long run results in better compliance. And we do have to do a study to look at that, and we're in the process of doing that through our TrueNorth Health Foundation.
Well, I always tell people, do the least restrictive program you can do that gives you the results you want, but based on the numbers, it doesn't seem to be working for a lot of people, being more flexible, like you're saying. So
now we just recently did a query that to our patient population, and 1,100 people completed a detailed personality profile. And what we're looking at there, we have the data on those patients to tell who was successful, for example, at long-term weight maintenance. So people that have lost weight and kept it off. And what we're in the process right now, we have a statistician analysis is looking, is there a difference in personality amongst the people that lost weight and kept it off versus those that lost weight but regained it? Because what we're trying, because they're all been given the same recommendations, education, and support, we're trying to determine what are the variables that determine success. Here are things we think we might find. We might find that people that have supportive environments where they go home to supportive mates and family may help. We believe that people that engage in ongoing education and inspiration, when they do things like your weight loss management programs, these types of things that continue to educate and inspire themselves, we believe that that may help. We believe that people that adopt the strict health promoting diet and lifestyle may do better than people that don't, but we don't know that for sure. That's why we've got to do some research.
Thank you. You had mentioned alcohol, and Lisa asks, what effect does alcohol have, if any, on the immune system? And I would also ask you if coffee has an effect on the immune system.
Yeah, those are really good questions. There is a bit of literature out on alcohol and its immunosuppressive effects. I don't know the literature immunologically on coffee. This is stuff that actually our team is researching right now, looking at, what are the specific effects, what are the markers that we can measure it with. So I really can't answer that question definitively. But I'll tell you what I suspect. I suspect that coffee has a profound effect on the immune system, but it may be indirect. It's a powerful nervous system stimulant, and it can disrupt sleep quality. So the coffee you drink even in the morning can have an effect on the evening. And disruption of sleep quality has been shown to have a profound effect on immunological function. So anything that gets you from getting into non-REM deep sleep and getting recuperative sleep is probably going to turn out to be detrimental.
Wow. You say you've been following the SOS-free diet for like 46 years. So you were 16. You're a year older than me. I didn't hear about this until 2008. And it was actually before I even met you. I heard about it in a lecture that Dr. Esselstyn gave at one of Jeff Nelson's Healthy Lifestyle Expos. So how does this would have been 1975? How did you even hear about this? And why, as a 16-year-old, would you think to do what many people are calling an extreme diet?
Yeah, well, for me, I was healthy, but wanted to be healthier because I wanted to be Dr. Lyle in playing basketball, and he used to beat me terribly. So I read Herbert Shelton and other books that said, oh, if you adopt a health-promoting diet without these refined carbohydrates, it would make you healthier. And I thought, well, if I get healthier, that might give me an edge. And I did, but unfortunately it failed. It was a complete failure because Dr. Lyle adopted the same kind of diet, and he still beats me badly every time we play. So for me, it was a failure, but it was a motivating factor. And I got interested in this. I met my uncle. He inspired me. He was a physician. When I was 16, I had decided that I was going to go into this area as a profession. And I told my family that at my 16th birthday party, actually. And he said that I shouldn't do that, that it was the worst thing that he's ever heard of, that nobody in this family should go to a doctor like that, and that certainly not become a doctor like that. In fact, he said better I should be a communist spy. And so when my father took me aside, he said, son, I don't know anything about this alternative medicine business, but he said, anything that makes your uncle that angry and mad, it can't be bad. So good luck to you, son. You stick to your guns. And so I got involved with it, and it didn't necessarily help my basketball very much, but it did allow me, I think, in part to keep playing basketball. So now here I am at 61, and I can still go out there and compete. And certainly I notice as the years go by, the players I'm playing against get younger and younger. And so I got the ultimate compliment just before the pandemic shut down the gyms. I was playing, and there was a new guy that showed up, and they said, pointing at me, they said, "Just don't let that old man shoot." So it was good.
That's terrific. People are saying nice things about how good you look and how good your skin is. I'm guessing you probably don't have a skincare routine. It's just your diet.
I do. I wash my face with soap and water every night. So I do shower and bathe. And so I think that is a healthcare regime. I don't use any product, but whatever.
Great. Julie says, do you have any advice for somebody living without a colon?
Without a colon? Yeah, when you have to bypass your colon, you have to adopt a very healthy diet in order to minimize the negative consequences. So we recommend a whole plant food diet that's free of salt, oil, and sugar in that case. And sometimes you have to modify the food factors even further to adapt to the anatomical limitations. But the basic dietary pattern doesn't change in general.
What about for somebody that's had gastric bypass? Debbie's saying because they often have absorption issues.
Yeah, that's an even bigger problem, because when you've had these bypass surgeries, sometimes you can't eat the volume of low density foods comfortably. And so you have to use a little bit more concentrated foods, which can make it more difficult to regulate caloric intake. However, fortunately, even the cooked and more concentrated versions of whole plant food diets work remarkably well. And so people are still able to sustain optimum weight and health, but it may be a little bit more difficult because they don't have the luxury of eating larger volumes sometimes of the salad material and the other material. They have to modify the diet, or maybe process those foods into blended salads, or make other adaptations because of the anatomical compromises that have been instituted in their systems.
Thank you. Suzanne ordered pure encapsulation B12, which is what you sell at TrueNorth, and wanted to know, is it okay to take while breastfeeding?
Yes, B12, we recommend 1,000 micrograms of methylcobalamin a day. It could be any reliable brand. It doesn't have to be, there's nothing, it has to be one brand or another. The thing I like about pure encapsulations is they're very vegan supportive, in that they use they don't use gelatin capsules, they'll use vegan capsules for their encapsulated products. They also have liquids, which I like, because when you figure out the cost per dose, it's cheaper. And so they have a liquid B12, they have the vegan encapsulated B12. So there's a lot of options. Same thing with D. They have the regular D3 from lanolin, which is basically wool, which is, an animal product. You don't have to kill the animal, but it is, derived from wool. But they also have a lichen-derived vitamin D liquid, which comes from lichen. So it's more expensive, I think, because of the whoever owns the patent on it, but nonetheless, it's just a 100% vegan version of vitamin D. So there's a number of reasons why we've chosen to recommend that particular company, but I don't know that there's any problem with the reliability of major brands for methylcobalamin or B12. You can get, lots of different options there.
Thank you. So what do you think of some of these newer vegan doctors saying, in promoting vegan keto, they're saying that oil really doesn't make heart disease worse or even cause it? And I know how you feel about oil, but what do you think about the vegan keto diet?
Well, I think a vegan keto diet would probably be less damaging than a conventional keto diet. We wouldn't recommend the dead Dr. Atkins diet or something like that to anybody. So if you were trying to do a keto diet, let's say, for example, you wanted to keep the person in ketosis for whatever reason, whether you thought that was going to be helpful in cancer management, or they had seizure disorders, or some reason why you wanted to alter the physiology of the person to burn fat rather than sugar, you'd certainly want to try to do it in a vegan format. But that's a rare exception. Most people are not going to thrive as well on a ketogenic diet long term as they would on a whole plant food diet. Now, you want to remember that sometimes what's good for short term isn't necessarily sustainable long term. So you might be able to argue, well, if I do this vegan keto diet, it helps me lose weight temporarily, or it helps me deal with these symptoms temporarily. And that may be true, but it may not necessarily be true that it's a long-term health promoting sustainable diet. Also, the things you do sometimes to maximize athletic performance aren't necessarily the same things you do to maximize health. So that what might make you a bigger, stronger lineman isn't necessarily going to be the thing that protects your heart or protects you from cancer in the long run. So again, if we're talking about long-term health promotion, then I would not recommend a ketogenic diet, even a vegan ketogenic diet, unless there was some extraordinary circumstance where, you know, that individual, it was determined that that was in their best, at least short-term health interest.
Thank you. Jana says, can you do this little by little?
Yes, you can. And the faster you do it, the sooner you get to where you want to go. And it's just like a Band-Aid. You know, some people, it's better to just take it off, and other people want to peel it off slowly. And so I think there's a certain personal preference. But as long as you do the transition, say in a week or two, I don't really mind if you take that extra few days.
Great. So do you believe that there is any particular food or category of food that human beings absolutely must eat 100% for health, longevity? There are many people that feel that if we do not eat nuts, we'll get heart disease or a stroke. And if we don't eat beans, we won't live long like the blue zones. But there are people, including people, there's almost 500 people watching live right now that have certain digestive issues like SIBO and IBS, and they've tried, they can't eat legumes. Other people can't eat nuts either from allergies or because they're a food trigger for their food addictions. And yet they feel like they're bean and nut shamed or failed vegans because they can't eat certain foods. Do we have to eat particular foods, or can we just eat food?
Well, I think that there is no one particular class of foods that has to be included to ensure optimum health. If there was a class that I would say was most critical, it would be our vegetable foods. So, you know, whether it's raw salad materials, cooked vegetable materials, greens, whether it's the starchy vegetables, the Hubbard squash, the butternut squash, the sweet potatoes, you know, somewhere in there's going to be a selection of foods that hopefully will make up the bulk of both the quantity and quality of your diet. But nuts, if you don't do well with nuts, say for example, you have allergies to nuts, it's because you don't eat nuts, you're not going to prevent you from being able to achieve and maintain long-term optimum health. For example, some people that can't eat nuts may do okay with seeds. They might be able to do some flaxseed or something. Other people don't do well with seeds. They might be able to do with nuts. Some people don't do with nuts or seeds. They can get the raw materials they need from other sources. So as far as fruit, I have patients that don't use fruit at all in their diets. I think it limits the diet in the sense that fruits are kind of cool. It's nice to have the variety of textures, tastes, colors, flavors. But if you don't do well with that because you have particular problems with blood sugar level and you haven't had the ability to fast or overcome that yet, you may have to exclude fruit from your diet. Not the end of the world. In terms of beans, if people don't do well with beans, they can get rid of beans and still be healthy. It's unfortunate because beans add a lot of affordable, high quality nutrition. But if you're not able to digest them, then it doesn't mean you're not going to be able to achieve optimum health. So the biggest problem I would have would be a patient that wasn't able to eat vegetable material. That would mean you'd have to put them on a diet that was, you know, using these other foods exclusively. I think that in the long run, they probably wouldn't do as well as they would if we can incorporate vegetables as the bulk of the diet. So I guess my answer to your question would be, yeah, I guess vegetable material would be the most critical component.
Thank you. Bruce says, what do you think about an all potato diet? There was a guy that did it for a year and lost a lot of weight, but I think he was also drinking alcohol.
Well, I don't know who they're specifically referring to, but I have, in fact, I had a patient that did potato diet only for extended periods of time, did very well on it. I wouldn't recommend a mono diet on any substance, even something as nutritious as potatoes indefinitely, because you will get a variety of nutrient base by incorporating vegetable materials in with whatever your primary source of starch is. It could be potatoes, it could be sweet potatoes, but I would still include a couple pounds a day of raw and cooked vegetable materials in order to optimize maximum quantity and quality of nutrients and diversity. So could you do it? Absolutely. You know, people have done it, and And basically anything you do other than get 2,000 calories a day from greasy, slimy, fatty, dead, decaying flesh is likely to result in some kind of systematic improvement. But I get a little frustrated with people saying, well, it's a lot better than X, Y, or Z. And that may be true, but something being less bad doesn't actually rise to the level of being good. If you want to talk about what's good, whole plant food diet, fruits, vegetables, grains, legumes, nuts, and seeds, and some kind of combination enough to meet your needs. What's not good? Animal foods, meat, fish, fowl, eggs, dairy products, oil, salt, and sugar, highly refractionated or processed foods. So we have kind of quote good and we have bad, and the less bad and the more good, the healthier you're going to be.
Thank you. Liz says she recently tried an expensive fasting mimicking diet. She said she felt very unwell, that the food was disgusting, and she was constipated and nauseous. Do you think these are good strategies?
So I do advocate intermittent fasting for people. I think everybody should fast every day for between 12 and 16 hours. So what that means is I suggest people not eat 3 hours before they go to bed, at least, that they don't have to eat too early in the morning, so that there's a period of 12 to 16 hours of fasting each and every day. We believe that the cumulative effect of these brief periods of fasting adds up to biological changes consistent with health promotion. The other possibility is that by limiting our feeding window, we may reduce some of the excess overeating that occurs, even on healthy diets. Just narrowing the feeding window seems to be a helpful tool for some at maintaining optimum health and weight, regardless of which diet they choose to be eating. So that is something I advocate. Then there are also periods where people will limit caloric intake for 5 or 7 days, maybe by taking a substance that's produced for them and it's a product that's sold, or maybe limiting it to raw fruit and vegetables only. And these programs, I think for some people, can be helpful at helping them make transitions away from the conventional eating program, facilitate short-term weight loss. But these are not designed as sustainable diets. You're not going to go on these products indefinitely. And I think we still need to do a whole lot more research to determine how helpful are these products at helping long-term success at weight change. And they may be, and that's fine. I don't have a fundamental in principle argument against them, although I would say that from my viewpoint, it's all interesting that if you just adopt a whole plant food SOS-free diet and you're a male, you're going to lose about 3 pounds a week on average, and if you're a female, about 2 pounds a week on average, whether you buy substances or not. So I don't know that it has to be complicated. It can actually be done pretty simply if you want to facilitate additional weight loss, or just adopt a health promoting diet and show some discipline over time, and you're going to ultimately achieve your weight goals as well.
Thank you. Sunny wants to know if you can ever reverse gallstones without surgery.
Well, gallstones are, frequently passing in people. So, I mean, when you say reverse it, you want to reverse the formation of new stones. Stones that have already been formed may or may not break down or may not pass. And when they do pass, they can be rather uncomfortable. We see that in fasting. A lot of times stones that have already been formed may get purged during the fasting process. That could be one of the many, what I call entertaining symptoms that can sometimes come up during fasting. But we know that dietary change can result in physiological changes that alter this formation of new stones. So people that are frequent stone formers oftentimes stop forming new stones once they make adequate diet and lifestyle changes.
Terrific. Let's see. Catherine wanted to know if you could talk about sleep hygiene.
Yeah, getting enough sleep is an important issue. And to get enough quantity and quality of sleep, you need to sleep in a cool, dark, and quiet place. And you need to make sure that you're not being disrupted by your mates or your pets or anything else, your ringing phones or your other factors. So you try to create a cool, dark, and quiet place that allows you to sleep so long that you can wake spontaneously feeling refreshed. And that's usually a good sign. If you can wake feeling refreshed, that's probably a good indication that you got the quantity and quality of sleep you need. It's going to range from anywhere from 6 to 8 hours or more in some cases, depending on how you live. You want to sleep less? Then eat well. People that eat well don't need quite as much sleep as people that don't. Don't have stress, or don't watch so much news every day or whatever it is you have to do. Reduce your stress input. Engage in enough but not too much physical activity. Develop effective interpersonal relationships. If you do all these things, the need for sleep may be somewhat reduced compared to those people that don't have the benefit of those healthful habits. but you still need to get enough sleep that you can wake and feel refreshed. And if you're not, that means the quality or quantity of your sleep is inadequate. You're not going to be as healthy as you would if you fix that problem.
Thank you. Jamonti says, I know SOS free is low fat, but is it? You haven't mentioned that. And asks, can you still be not the skinniest version of yourself, but still be healthy?
Well, I don't think it is actually technically a low-fat diet that we're advocating, because we're limiting, for example, in people that are able to eat nuts and seeds, we limit them on average to about an ounce a day. So it's the one food we do portion control, because it is a food that is highly concentrated and sometimes people will overeat on. And even some of the higher fat vegetable foods, avocado and things, again, we recommend portion control. But even with portion control, if you eat up to an ounce of nuts or seeds a day, or half an avocado, you're going to find that the percentage of calories from fat in the diet is around 15 to 18% of calories from fat. Whereas people advocating low-fat diets, Dr. McDougall, Dr. Esselstyn, and others for management of cardiovascular disease, are advocating 10 or 12% of calories from fat. So this, because they'll exclude nuts, avocado, other higher fat animal foods entirely from the diet. So although I believe that we're going to find that these lower fat whole plant food SOS-free diets will result in equal efficacy in reversal of cardiovascular disease as an even stricter version. We can't prove that yet. Nobody's done that research. The research says are people like Pritikin and Esselstyn that are using no concentrated vegetable fats and obviously no oils and other things in the diet as well. So I would absolutely agree that the research supporting my contention has not yet been completed. However, my clinical observations have been that people adopting this diet that is lower in fat, that is 15 to 18% of calories, do seem to reverse the coronary artery disease and do seem to do well in terms of my unproven clinical observations. And I believe that I'll end up being proven correct on that, but that data is not available yet.
Thank you. Stephen asks, is there iodine in dulse? Because according to Chronometer, he says it's not showing any iodine.
I don't know if there's iodine in dulse, because I don't know that the Chronometer, I don't think it's saying 0. I don't know that it's measured there. But there is in other sea vegetables, particularly kelp is exceptionally high in iodine. And even your other sea vegetables are thought to contain significant amounts of iodine. So small amounts of these materials, if they're incorporated in the diet, would almost certainly increase iodine intake. The other thing is plant vegetables that are grown on the coast tend to have iodine concentration as well. It's only foods grown in the middle of the country where the oceans never covered it that are iodine deficient. So I think that most varied diets are going to have enough iodine intake, although you could certainly consider supplementation of that if you were concerned about that.
Thank you. Monica says, what happened to your uncle? Like, how does he feel about you now?
Well, my uncle was a very stubborn man. He taught at the VA. He knew everything about anything as far as he was concerned. He wouldn't review, for example, our high blood pressure data when we did our first study. He said he wouldn't look at it until it was published in a peer-reviewed journal. Couldn't bother wasting his time. And then finally, we got our first paper accepted for publication in a peer-reviewed journal. 2 months before it came out, he died of a massive heart attack. And my mother insisted that he died just so he wouldn't have to admit that he was wrong.
That's hilarious. So, where did the question go? I'm sorry, I lost the person's name, but she wanted to know, what do you do about children, vegan children, but they don't like a wide variety? Lola, what do you do for your vegan kids who don't love a variety of veggies?
Yeah, we just have them eat more of the veggies that they will eat, and continue to ask them to experiment every once in a while with just a little taste. And over time, oftentimes they find that their tastes will change and they'll develop a broader appreciation for it. Most importantly, if you want kids to enjoy vegetables, stop feeding them all the sugar, oil, and salt, because once they're off all the SOS-free, highly processed foods, particularly once they actually get some appetite, and all the choices available are whole natural foods, they tend to start gravitating more towards whole natural foods. So the problem is we've turned our children into little addicts, and so they don't like the less stimulating effects because they're addicted to the artificial stimulation that comes from the highly processed foods. And so, you know, you have to help your kids break those addictions, and that's very difficult, you know, especially if you're not setting a good example. You can bet your kids will be following your modeling.
Well, you know, you had mentioned earlier that it's so hard for not hard for you and me. You know, I don't think anything bothers you. You have a very unique personality and you're very stable and calm. But it sometimes bothers me the way other people talk about us, like that I'm this like Goldhamer light, that literally you and I are the only people that can do this diet. I hear it Doug and Jen saying on their podcast all the time. And I love them just like I love you, and they're my friends like you are. But I have worked with thousands of people now. You've probably worked with exponentially thousands more. And yes, it is difficult, but I have success in at least hundreds of people that I could tell you about now.
Yeah. So there's no question that this is a very difficult approach. And it's also, in my mind, it's also a very effective approach, but not everybody's willing to pay the price for maximum effectiveness. And so, you know, each individual has to decide what is their goal, what's their motivation. I have to say, AJ, I found there are some people that are much easier to work with than others. I find one of the best patients are people that are properly motivated. And the best motivation is pain, debility, and fear of death. So people that come in that are in a lot of pain, that are, you know, really miserable, they want to blow their brains out because their life isn't worth living, that sometimes makes a better patient than a person that has a relatively minor issue. The problem with those people is once they get well, their motivation, pain, debility, and fear of death begins to reduce. And so sometimes we do have recidivism issues until they get back into pain, debility, and death. Other people that are good are people that are doing it intellectually. They're doing it because just they've done the math and they figured out what they want and they're willing to do whatever it's going to take to get there. But for a lot of people, they're living their lives really more emotionally, not so much analytically or intellectually. So they want what's, you know, the quickest, fastest, easiest, not necessarily what has the best long-term gain. And so I think that for those individuals, this seems overwhelming. And honestly, it may be. I don't know. I don't work with those individuals. I mean, honestly, most of those kind of people would never come to the TrueNorth Health Center because they look at our material and, you know, run away screaming. So we have a opportunity to work with the highly motivated people that are willing to basically do anything in order to recover their health because they want to be around and they want to get out of pain and they want to live their life. And so it makes it a real joy because those people, even though sometimes they have to struggle with, you know, recovery, they're willing to put in the hard work that it takes to get and stay well. And for the other people that, you know, not getting a chance to work with those people, I don't know how they have the patience, honestly, because it's pretty frustrating to know what to do to get somebody well, but they don't want to do it. You know, or they do it and they get well, but then they won't keep doing it. That's really frustrating. And so I found the way to deal with the frustration is just work with the people that want to actually get well and pay the price. And so we've set our clinic up in such a way that we tend to filter out and collect those people that are willing to do that. By one, they have to consider the possibility, for example, of fasting. I mean, most people, they would never consider fasting. They think that would just sounds insane. And then they also have to realize that if they come to TrueNorth Health, it's a whole plant food SOS-free diet. There is no meat, fish, fowl, eggs, dairy products, coffee, alcohol. They'd have to be in a place where for days or weeks, they wouldn't have access to any of that. That's enough to get rid of a lot of other people. And the people that are left are usually, you know, our patients. The 1,000 people a year we admit at TrueNorth Health, I think is one of our strongest attributes to the doctors that work there because it's the first time they've ever had people that can actually get well and are willing to do this kind of approach. But even with those people, it's still a challenge because they have to sometimes go home. And in the temptations of the home environment, obviously we have significant recidivism. And what we're trying to do right now is figure out what can we do to support people better so that when they go home, they're able to sustain these results. And I'm really happy to say we've made huge progress there. For example, you yourself know that your program has been effective in many of our patients at helping them sustain long-term weight loss because they've been able to get not just the education, but the psychological support that comes along in engaging in group activities where they're not the only one in the world trying to do this. We also have companies like Mama Says and Leafside that have been willing to offer SOS-free options of food to their clients, and they're finding increasing numbers of people that are interested in taking advantage of that. And that reduces the channel factors because they can get, whether it's freeze-dried, they can travel with it, or it's mama says fresh, ready to heat and eat, that they don't have to put all the energy in every single day of making every single meal. That's been very helpful, and I think it's going to show, we'll be able to demonstrate improved compliance. And then also all this web-based education and support, I think, is going to turn out to be helpful too. And we're going to be launching next week through the TrueNorth Health Foundation a phone coaching service where people are able to get affordable access to attending doctors that aren't idiots, that can, get support, ongoing encouragement and information through web-based systems, And so we've bit the bullet, purchased the hardware and software, and we're about to launch a program that's going to give people access at home to, for example, our ongoing lecture programs at the center, video library that we're putting together, as well as direct access to our coaches and our doctors on an affordable basis. So I'm optimistic that we'll be able to improve adherence and compliance in a broader range of people, but it'll still probably be a relatively small part of the population that's willing to do what it takes to actually get and stay well.
Thank you. There was a really funny question or comment by, I think it was by Rich. This goes very fast, so I apologize. Do you feel like you inherited some of your uncle's stubbornness, for better or worse?
I think I may very well have gotten a little bit of that stubbornness, although, yeah, I think what I got more from him was inspiration. Not so much genetics. I think I was just so inspired by his vehement antagonism to this entire approach that really piqued my interest. And I think that my father, his support and recognizing that same observation was actually really encouraging.
Terrific. Betty says, what's wrong with meat and fish? Maybe we could just suggest you read this book.
Well, meat, fish, fat, eggs, and dairy products all share one common thing. These animal products all suffer from a biological concentration issue. Animals get exposed to the same kind of nonsense that we do in the environment, even more so because we put stuff in their feed, antibiotics and pesticides and chemicals and residues, and that material builds up day after day after week after month inside the animal. When you kill and eat the animal or drink its products, you get its entire lifetime accumulation of toxicity. So a calorie of plant food compared to a calorie of animal food, you could find between 2,000 and 1,000 times the concentration of various substances in animal food compared to plant food because of this biological concentration issue. Animal foods also really high in protein and fat, and excess fat and protein are responsible for our difficulties, we believe, with cardiovascular disease, increased risk of cancer, and other problems. Some people make arguments that the animal products are an important threat to the environment because of their impact on global warming, et cetera. And some people make arguments about moral, ethical, and spiritual consequences of taking sentient creatures, torturing them all their life, and then killing them and eating them when it's not necessary. So you can make a lot of different kinds of arguments about animal products. But my basic argument is the more animal foods you eat, the more compromised your health tends to be. And so, I just think that in this environment, the best strategy is to avoid meat, fish, fowl, eggs, and dairy products. Whether it's moral, ethical, spiritual, environmental, or health, all of those arguments, I think, are pretty compelling when it comes to avoiding animal foods.
Terrific. Linda wants to know, as a type 1 diabetic, could she do a juice fast at TrueNorth? Because they can't do a water fast if they're type 1, right?
Right. There are many patients that water fasting may not be appropriate. And so we would do either a modified feeding regime or juice fasting. We put a program together for each person. About 15% of the people that come to us are not coming, have nothing to do with fasting. It may be modified fasting or juice fasting or other programs. And so I don't think we have a preconceived idea for any given individual what the best approach is. Sometimes it's not fasting at all. And one of the things I'd mention is we do offer a free service, which is pretty cool, I think, is that if a person goes to our website at healthpromoting.com and completes the registration forms, I offer a free phone conversation with me to discuss what kind of candidate they might be, whether it be fasting or dietary changes or things they can do that they're not doing. And I'll also refer you, if you aren't able to access the center, we may be able to refer you to somebody closer to you. Or we also have this phone coaching business now where our attendings are available over the phone to provide meaningful support and get into the details and the weeds of the specific diet and lifestyle changes you make. But as far as the general screening call, you can do that without any cost, and I'll be happy to speak with you. Just complete the registration forms and give me a call.
That's great. I think this person tuned in a little bit late because she asks, is it better to have sea salt or iodized salt?
Yeah, it would be better to avoid adding salt to the diet, whether it's iodized or not. We want to avoid salt because of its effect on passive overeating, because of its effect on blood pressure and fluid retention. And generally, all the salt you're going to need is going to be contained in the high volume of vegetable-based materials that we're going to be recommending that you eat. So you shouldn't have to add refined salt any more than you'd have to add refined sugar or refined oil into your diet.
Great. And here's a question on flour. Isn't it just as bad in terms of caloric density in people with food addictions than
Well,
sugar?
it's not quite as bad as pure sugar. You know, flour is about 1,500 calories a pound. Sugar is 1,800 calories a pound. But clearly, flour products, if your goal is weight loss, you're going to need to minimize the use of flour products if you want to maximize the weight loss of weight. So if you wanted to eat rice, you might be able to do that. But if you turn that rice into flour and then bake products up with it, you're going to significantly increase its caloric density. And so it may not be a health compromising factor in and of itself, but the effect of the refined processing may influence your ability to maintain weight loss. So for people trying to lose weight, we would try to minimize flour products. On the other hand, let's say you had people you're trying to gain weight, or maybe you're feeding kids and you're trying to get more calories into them. Then we might go the other way. We might use some of these like rice pasta or other more processed food products to increase caloric density so they're so full that when they go to school, there's not much room left for those federally subsidized lunch programs that are trying to shove into the kids.
Thank you. Dr. Goldhamer, we've gone an hour. I want to respect your time, but there's still a few questions. Would you like to go a few minutes longer, or would you like to
Certainly.
just come back another time? Thank you. So there's a question, and you don't have to answer this in its entirety, only because I know you're going to be a guest on the GI Health Summit, but would fasting help SIBO?
Well, you know, it's interesting with, this is a kind of not a new condition, but a new frequent diagnosis, the idea of intestinal overgrowth. And I'm going to go into in the GI Summit, I'll talk a lot about this in detail, but there's no question that one of the benefits of fasting may be actually giving the body a chance to reboot that whole gut microbiome. You know, you have this 5 pounds of bacteria living in your gut, maybe 1,000 different strains, and we believe that we're going to find that fasting is one of the most effective ways of giving the body a chance to recalibrate that microbiome. We've done a study, it's actually completed, but the data is not available yet, including to me, as far as the results are concerned. So maybe by the time of the summit, we'll have the results of that study. We took 21 subjects and we did fecal analysis before and after long-term fasting, and we did it on 21 subjects. And I believe it'll be the first data ever to look at this in long-term fasting. But so I'm just anxious, hoping that we'll have the data available soon.
This is an interesting question that I've heard before from Rochelle, because there was an article in, I don't know how I got subscribed to the New York Times, because I don't even read the paper or watch the news, but for some reason I'm getting it. And there was an article that the younger people that were dying from COVID-19 tended to be overweight or obese, whether or not they had pre-existing health conditions. And Rochelle writes, I'm terrified that if you get infected with the virus, that if you are obese, the outcome would most likely not be good. I cannot change this overnight, and the stress of this makes me want to overeat more. And so what I'm hearing, Dr. Goldhamer, and that's why I'm doing this show, I've been going live 1 to 3 times a day just to kind of help people, you know, just feel better and give them something to think about other than the virus. But I'm seeing there's a group of people that are using this time really to clean up their act, to clean their environment, to learn some batch cooking. And then there's another group of people that are like, I'm so anxious and depressed, I'm just going to eat all the crap.
Okay, so let's be clear that, yes, risk factors include age, obesity, diabetes, high blood pressure. In fact, if you think of metabolic syndrome, all the things that contribute to metabolic syndrome are the things that also, not surprisingly, increase your risk of having a bad outcome with any infection, including apparently COVID. However, I want you to think about this. Let's use diabetes as a model because we have data on that. If you're a diabetic and you go on a whole plant food SOS-free diet, you start losing weight and your blood sugar starts coming down. What's interesting is your blood sugar will often normalize long before all that weight is off. I don't believe it's just the weight that's the problem. It's the diet that makes you fat that's the problem, not just the fact that you're storing some extra reserves in the form of fat. And the day you change the diet that makes you fat, you start losing your fat. And it turns out you mobilize your fat in inverse proportion to its importance to the body. So visceral fat itself, we've done a study recently with fasting, and we found that visceral fat was selectively and preferentially mobilized during fasting compared to even aggressive weight loss dietary changes. So we know that the body has the ability to address these most health compromising fat components. And so don't assume you have to lose all your fat to reduce your risk factor. It's likely that your risk factors are going to be reduced dramatically, literally within days or weeks of making these dietary changes. And so, yes, it's true that getting close to optimum weight is probably going to correlate with optimum health, but the elevated risk factors associated with obesity are almost certainly going to turn out to be tied to the elevated risk factor associated with the diet that keeps you fat. So if you want to stress about something, stress about the diet you're eating, not about how much fat reserves you may still have residual in your body. And if you use the stress to motivate yourself to make improved dietary change, likely you're going to get a significant reduced risk factor should you become infected. Hopefully you'll be one of the 85% that don't even have any untoward effects. And even if you have untoward effects, you'll be the 93% of all people, and even higher percentage of people that don't have pre-existing conditions that survive and thrive post-infection. So remember, the vast majority of people are able to go through this process of infection with the more current viruses that we're exposed to without having terrible consequences. The problem is if you even think about this. Let's say you're over 80 and you're a smoker and you have risk factors. Even those, the majority of those people survive and recover. So it's an unfortunate minority of patients, particularly people that are vulnerable, that have these pre-existing conditions, are the ones that seem to suffer the most. So that doesn't mean it's not serious, and it doesn't mean there may not be younger people that have serious consequences. And that's true, by the way, with influenza and even other bacterial infections. Occasionally you have people, for whatever reason, genetic predisposition, who knows, that have bad reactions. So certainly it makes sense to try to minimize exposure. That's why we use hand washing and social distancing and whatever else it is that they're recommending to try to minimize your chance for exposure. My bigger concern is what can you do to maximize your chance of healthy recovery, and that's going to be where diet, sleep, and exercise become paramount. Sleep is important there for immunological function. Don't be depriving yourself of sleep right now, because sleep deprivation may result in reduced immunological vitality. And don't be putting yourself on a antigenic-rich diet, the same kind of diets that promote autoimmune disease, because we know that an autoimmune response seems to be associated with a poor response to health recovery in infection. So do everything you can to promote health, and hopefully you'll be one of those people that either avoids exposure or gets exposure but recovers without secondary effects.
Becca asks, what's wrong with wild salmon?
Well, again, arguing that wild salmon may have somewhat less health compromising components than other salmon doesn't make eating salmon advantageous. And I would argue that today even wild salmon still has vulnerabilities of biological concentration and mercury concentrations and other things. And so, yeah, if you were going to eat salmon, there might be advantages to eating one kind of salmon over another. But I think the best strategy for us, in my opinion, is to just let the animal products go right now. Let's hold off on eating the meat, fish, fowl, eggs, dairy products. Let's not eat products with added oil, salt, and sugar. And instead, let's fill ourselves up with fruits, vegetables, grains, legumes, nuts, and seeds. And I think you'll find that you'll be so healthy you won't have much time to worry about the details.
Thank you. Mark says he's been on a whole food plant-based diet since February, but he has gout. What is he doing wrong?
He has what?
Gout.
Oh, well, one of the things that happens when people go through rapid weight loss, no matter how you do it, even on a health-promoting diet, is you can put a lot of load on the body from breaking down excess fat that can overload genetically vulnerable people's kidneys, and you can develop elevated uric acid and have clearance problems. That's definitely a possibility. It's less common when people do it healthfully, but it definitely can happen. It can definitely happen after fasting. If you fast and go through anytime you do rapid weight loss. And so if you're having gouty problems, there are strategies you can use to minimize that. But that gets into a very specific medical management scenario. And what I would recommend you consider doing is calling and scheduling a phone consult with one of the doctors at the TrueNorth Health Center. It could be Dr. Varese, Dr. Struck, or others, and let them review your medical history, take a look at the lab values, and get really specific about what additional actions you can take to minimize the secondary effects of gout and give your body and your kidneys in particular a chance to recover so that you don't have those symptoms. And you know, it's going to be a small percentage, but that small percentage does need a little extra help in order to mitigate it.
Terrific. You know, I was curious if SOS-free diet was taking off, and you know, I Googled it, and it's actually like a lot of hits came up. There's people other than you and me that actually recommend it and embrace it. Like what came up was Dr. Rosanne Alvier in the UC Davis School of Integrative Medicine, and many different chefs and bloggers and YouTubers that maybe not be as well known, but they're doing it. So
well, now we're also getting a lot of criticism, because now we're seeing people criticizing our version of the vegan diet, that is a vegan SOS-free diet, as saying it's too strict, it's too rigid. The same criticisms, by the way, people used to make about the vegan diet as a whole. They said, well, let people have chicken and fish and a little bit of cheese, because, you know, if you just tell them to eat no animal foods, that's way too radical. And, you know, and then we learned that, well, gee, that cheese and stuff may be actually more health compromising in some ways even than the meat. And so then, you know, now there's become more of a consensus that, okay, maybe it's okay to recommend vegan, but to also recommend, okay, maybe we can get rid of the oil, but not the salt, or we can get rid of the oil and the salt, but not the sugar. We can get rid of the sugar and the oil, but not, nobody wants to get rid of everything. So, you know, that's why I get into the theme where I tell people, if you go inside themselves and look at any food and just ask yourself, do you really want that substance? Do you really, really want it? And if the answer is truly yes, then you know. You can't have it because you get nothing.
That is great. I was going to say that would be a terrific note to end on, but I do want to ask this question from Carol. She asks if you've successfully worked to help reverse heart disease in persons who have high lipoprotein A.
Yes, many of our patients with coronary artery disease have elevated levels of various biomarkers, including lipoprotein A. And with dietary change, we often do see correction. Sometimes it's a little bit more rapid when we introduce fasting into the mix. But even these people that are told they have congenital hypertriglyceridemia, they have congenital hypercholesteremia, and they have 600 milligram percent cholesterol, and even some of these patients, when they're willing to do really radical things like adopt a health promoting diet, engage in exercise, undergo fasting, these patients oftentimes get really remarkable results. And if you'd like, you can go to our new website at fasting.org, where all of our research and other people's research about the effect of fasting and these kind of interventions is being posted. It's all freely available. In fact, we have, I think, over 500 articles on fasting that are in the process of being launched right now. So I'd suggest you consider looking at that and see for yourself what the research has said about the effectiveness of, you know, conservative intervention in recovering from some of these serious problems.
Karen mentioned hair loss. I've heard that sometimes with people, especially if they're losing weight.
Yeah, anytime there's rapid weight loss, whether it's fasting or aggressive dietary change or pregnancy, you know, a period can go through a bit of adaptation where the hair follicles mature. You'll get extra thinning for a while. So you don't lose the hair follicles. It's not like the hair doesn't come back. It's just that it all matures together. And so you'll see, usually it's about 30 days post rapid weight loss, that the following cycle, there's some changes that occur. So there's some hair thinning, people freak out, and then the hair comes back and they're fine. And I haven't seen patients where there's sustained effect from it. Now, there are other things that can cause that too. Infections in the scalp, thyroid problems, there's all kinds of neuroendocrine issues that can be manifest in hair loss, as well as chemotherapy and other changes. But the important thing to know is that the rapid weight loss that results in hormone changes that can be associated with hair loss is a transient, temporary situation, and generally it corrects.
You had mentioned earlier that this is easy for you because of your job, and but I'll make this the last question because I see you looking over your shoulder and I really appreciate you going over. Jan just wanted to know if you have any strategies that you use when you're traveling, or have you ever been in a situation where you just couldn't find healthy food?
Oh yeah, it happens all the time, and I just don't eat. But it's like people think if you get on a plane in New York and travel to New York or to California, you would die over Colorado if you don't eat it. Turns out it's not true. The peanuts aren't saving your life. You'll survive just fine. When I travel, I will oftentimes take some calories with me, just so if I do get hungry, I've got whether it's some nuts or seeds or a leaf side product or some other materials. But generally, there are these places when you travel now, they're called grocery stores. And you can go in and get things like, banana, and you peel and eat it, and it works out fine. You can take some oats and put some hot water in them and make oatmeal out of it. You can get a potato, put it in a microwave, and eat the potato. It may not be quite as good as if it was steamed, or maybe you can get what are the devices you carry, AJ?
The Instant Pot.
Instant Pot or something like that, where you travel with it, and so there's different strategies. I honestly don't find very much problems traveling. I'm not afraid to ask a restaurant to give me what I want. I've never had a restaurant say, "What do you want steamed vegetables? Oh, we don't want your kind here. Take your money and go away." Usually they're more than happy to accommodate you if you're crystal clear about what you want. So, you just have to, and I feel like it's almost a service, because every time you go into a restaurant and say, "Well, this is what I want," and the more they hear that, soon they start offering those options. And so, you're actually influencing and helping other people by being insistent and persistent. And, at the conference that I was at, where there really wasn't anything to eat because it was a medical conference, I did eat the table decorations, and actually they were quite good.
Thank you so much, Dr. Goldhamer. Guys, come back in 90 minutes when I'll be interviewing Dr. Cyrus Kambata. I could talk to you forever, but I know you have to go, so please consider doing this again because you're such a wealth of information. Thank you guys for watching, and thank you so much, Dr. Goldhamer.
Very good.